Hello, I'm Esther Giduyot. It's Tuesday, January 11th. This is Africa 54.
U.S. President Joe Biden expresses concerns to Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed over the country's ongoing conflict, addressing the weaknesses in Liberia's healthcare system. And could Burkina Faso's husband schools be the key to better marriages? We'll have a report.
U.S. President Joe Biden and Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed held a critical but candid telephone call on Monday, just 10 days after an airstrike reportedly killed 56 at a camp for displaced people in Tigray. Natalie Powell has more.
Joe Biden has expressed concern over airstrikes in Ethiopia's north and over human rights issues, the White House has said. The U.S. president spoke with Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed by telephone on Monday. That call coming just 2 days after aid workers said an airstrike had killed 56 people at a camp for displaced people in the Tigray region. Footage from Tigray TV showed bodies being sprinkled with water while mourners watched, as well as damaged buildings and tents in what was purportedly the camp. Thousands have died and millions forced from their homes since war broke out between Abiy's federal military and the Tigray People's Liberation Front in November 2020. A senior US official said Biden had told Abiy that the United States wants to continue to see progress, including stopping airstrikes, expanding humanitarian access to all regions of the country, and engaging in ceasefire talks. The US has long partnered with Ethiopia to contain militants in neighbouring Somalia. The White House also said Biden and Abiy discussed human rights concerns, including over detentions of Ethiopians under the state of emergency. Human rights groups and the United Nations have raised concerns about large-scale arrests of ethnic Tigrayans. Abiy's government has denied ethnically motivated detentions were taking place. In a tweet, Abiy said the conversation with Biden was candid and that strengthening cooperation had been discussed.
Natalie Powell of Reuters filed that report. Attacks on medical facilities during an uprising in Sudan 3 years ago have re-emerged during rallies against an October coup, deepening anger among the protest movement and further straining a chronically under-resourced health system. Continuing violence against demonstrations could complicate efforts to resolve a standoff between military leaders and a large protest movement that is demanding civilian rule. Hundreds of protesters have been injured since the coup, mainly from gunshots and tear gas canisters, and at least 63 people have died, according to the Central Committee of Sudanese Doctors, a medics union aligned with the protesters.
Khartoum Teaching Hospital was attacked 3 times with tear gas inside this room, which receives patients injured in the accidents. Patients were sleeping in their hospital beds, and the doctors were sitting, and we were attacked with tear gas. It left a mark here. Patients, doctors, and staff were attacked with tear gas. This is unethical. It's inhumane and unacceptable. It's completely unacceptable to attack hospitals which are protected.
So we read a letter from the Sudanese health workers to the UN yesterday. And we have also been alarmed by reports of attacks against hospital facilities, hindrance of medical staff to do their job, hindering patients to come to get life-saving treatment. And we wanted to come here to express our support to the medical staff, to those working in laboratories, the paramedics, the nurses, the doctors, and to listen to their stories and what they have experienced.
The Khartoum State Security Committee is expressing regret at the violations of hospital grounds and say they are committed to providing high-ranking officers inside facilities to monitor any breaches. The COVID-19 pandemic is demonstrating how flaws in the healthcare systems can have far-reaching consequences for the health of the world's citizens. Like many countries worldwide, Liberia is facing many challenges due to the coronavirus pandemic. Observers say since the Ebola outbreak in 2015, Liberia's abilities to detect and respond to infectious diseases are much improved. However, the country's health system remains one of the weakest in the world. Alexander Cummings is a Liberian political leader and founder of the Cummings Africa Foundation. He spoke with Africa 54 health reporter Lino Mudu about the role of his foundation in improving the healthcare system in his country.
We established the foundation, we established an endowment so that whether my wife and I are alive or not, we got our children engaged and committed to it as well. So we established a foundation to institutionalize our giving so it survives our lives.
The foundation works from the position that, among other things, every person in every community, given the right opportunities, can reach their full potential. Now, these opportunities include health. How do you assess the healthcare landscape in Liberia, your country?
By every objective measure, our healthcare system is in very, very bad shape. And so the foundation actually has two focus areas. One is education, where we focus on STEM education, science, technology, engineering, math, and then we also do healthcare interventions. More recently, we have done interventions around the pandemic. So we provided, on the one hand, basic food commodities to orphanages, to other institutions during the lockdown. And then more recently, we provided PPE equipment, other medical supplies to help hospitals and clinics around the country. And then we do individual interventions where people need to get treated individually. They need to, maybe travel outside the country. The foundation will, on a case-by-case basis, help in that direction as well.
Where do you see the priorities in addressing healthcare in Liberia in particular, but even in Africa as a whole, because some of the issues are very similar?
One area is around focusing on primary health care. What kills most Liberians? Malaria, typhoid, hypertension, childbirth, diarrhea. With focus on primary health care, clinics around the country staffed by midwives and nurses with drugs and stuff can begin to address many of these basic illnesses that affects 80% of our people. The other area is around healthcare administration. So the institutions, the governance around healthcare is certainly poor in Liberia. Needs to be strengthened, needs to be revisited, because that's how you can sustain changes and improvements you make to the healthcare system.
How do we ensure that the people in villages and remote areas are also taken care of, because they are really forgotten in this equation?
This is where I go back to primary health care and having clinics well-staffed with drugs around the country, including, in fact, and primarily focus in the rural areas. One of the 4 or 5 things that kill most Liberians is childbirth. Our women have to be taken in hammocks on motorbikes for miles or walking to have the babies. So having clinics staffed with equipment in rural villages where our women can give birth to kids is one way you can address the rural challenges. And again, those clinics having all the drugs necessary is also important. And so, yes, this is not just about focusing on the urban areas, but focusing on the rural areas as well.
To you, what are some of the main takeaways from the pandemic with regards to healthcare?
I think in Africa, most of the world actually, the COVID pandemic made more apparent the weakness in our healthcare systems. We used to say, every crisis is an opportunity. And in Liberia, for a while there, we used the Ebola crisis to strengthen contact tracing, getting communities to kind of work together. That, to some extent, has actually helped us with the COVID pandemic. This COVID crisis, we needed to use as a continent to make sure we're re-strengthening our healthcare systems. I think COVID has brought to light the fact that we are self-sufficient. Hopefully our leaders actually act on these apparent weaknesses.
On Wednesday, in part 2 of Lino Mudu's conversation with Liberian political leader and philanthropist Alexander Cummings, he discusses his vision of leadership and some of his priorities to improve Liberia. Initial findings from 2 South African clinical trials suggest the Omicron coronavirus variant has a much higher rate of asymptomatic carriage than earlier variants, which could explain why it has spread so rapidly around the world. The studies, one of which was carried out when Omicron infections were surging in South Africa last month, and another which resampled participants around the same time, found a far greater number of people tested positive for the coronavirus, but were not showing symptoms compared to previous trials. In the Ubuntu study evaluating the efficacy of Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine in people living with HIV, 31% of 230 participants undergoing screening tested positive, with all 56 samples available for sequencing. The suspect in a fire that gutted parts of South Africa's 138-year-old parliament building this month was charged with terrorism on Tuesday, appearing in court for a case officials are describing as an attack on the country's democracy. Zandile Mafe, 49, had already been charged with arson in connection with a fire that started on January 2nd, but the additional charge of terrorism was added because he had also been caught with an explosive device, according to the prosecution. The case against Mafe has been adjourned until February 11th, and he is being detained in a psychiatric institute after pleas from his defense counsel that he is suffering from mental illness. Let us know what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, a Burkina Faso school educates husbands on how to have a better marriage. But first, Heidi Adams tells us what's coming up on Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
Next Straight Talk Africa, we'll take a look at informal housing and unplanned communities. Is there a place for them in big urban centers? We'll look at what the mayor of Freetown, Sierra Leone is doing, how she's bringing changes to her city, including its unplanned communities. We'll also talk to a Nigerian American who's making a big difference in affordable housing in Washington, D.C. Join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Lino Mudu, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Over 300,000 women die worldwide due to complications from pregnancy and childbirth every year, according to UNICEF's latest data. Uganda's maternal mortality rate is one of the world's highest, in memory of his mother, who died of childbirth complications. James Msinguzi, a trained lab technician, quit his job and moved back to his village in the Kitagwenda district in western Uganda to launch a community healthcare center to help women like his mother who died of childbirth complications. My colleague Paul Ndiho spoke to Msinguzi, the founder of the Gertrude Memorial Community Center in Kitagwenda district.
James, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you, Mr. Paul.
You recently quit your job and decided to venture on a new journey. You started a new health center to help you people in the communities where you come from. Bring me up to speed. What is it that you've been able to do?
I'm always driven by passion. With my background as a medical personnel, and with the background of my own community where I hail from and where I'm born, the Western Rural District of Uganda, called Kamwenge District, because of the poor health, rural health care is really so much demanding. The increasing mortality rates, the fatality rates, caused me to have that passion and inspiration to say, let me do something for my community. Let me do something so that our mothers can survive and thrive with their babies. Gertrude Memorial Community Health Center, the name Gertrude was my mother, who actually is one of the people who suffered those consequences of the poor maternity services.
What are some of the things that you offer at that facility?
Number one is free services for HIV counseling, testing, and guidance. We have free ambulance services for the most ill patients from our rural village, the biggest facility that is very many kilometers away from here. We offer free self-made circumcision services, and then we offer affordable and available services concerning the mental care that I'm telling you. We do the deliveries of mothers. We do family planning services.
I can hear some babies crying in the background. Do you just have like a kid delivered or something like that?
No, those are they're just in the ward, in the pediatric ward just behind me.
Where is like the nearest maybe government center or hospital where people can go other than your facility?
So someone has to travel for about I think about 15 to 30 kilometers to access a health center for level hospital. In the Ugandan setting, a health center has a medical officer as the main managing.
James, when you talk to some of the patients, people who have come to your center, what are their stories? What are their challenges?
The biggest story that I can report to you on a positive note is that the people have found it as the most accessible, valuable, affordable, and yet compassionate. People coming in very hard conditions, very ill, and within 24 to 48 hours, we discharge of a person. They go back there in the village and they're like, you know what, guys, Gertrude Memorial is the real deal. And on a negative side is that on the part of the facility, because of the reason that the services are very subsidized, very low, we are battling a challenge of we bring in drugs and other supplies and they immediately get consumed, and yet the return is very low.
Ultimately, what would you want to get out of something like this? You're talking about some of these challenges that you're facing. You are a new startup. How can people help you achieve that dream?
All the Voice of America followers and the fans, and those ones who have passion for health care, basically rural health care, maternal child health, palliative care, nutrition is number one. If there is someone out there who is willing to come and be part of us in volunteering with us, that would make a big deal, because it would mean human resource-wise we would be sorted. That is one. Two, we would need someone who would be there and is like, you know what, James, what are you lacking in your maternity wing? What are you lacking in basically as an equipment, so that we give you something as an equipment-wise? Someone could still come in and say, you know what, James, let me take over your maternity, because the biggest challenge in this community is something to do with maternity. Yeah.
Well, good luck with everything, and thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome, Mr. Paul.
That was Africa 54's Paul Ndiho speaking to James Msinguzi, founder of the Gertrude Memorial Community Center in Kitagwenda, Uganda. In male-dominated societies like Burkina Faso, wives are most often blamed when marriages run into trouble. But a project funded by the World Bank is testing the concept of teaching men how to be better husbands by taking them to school. Henry Wilkins reports from Yako, Burkina Faso.
The path to a successful marriage is not always an easy one, but an initiative set up in Burkina Faso by the Sahel Women's Empowerment and Demographic Dividend, SWED, aims to make it less difficult. Yeli Owigo, who is married to Kwame Zupoka, attended so-called husband schools organised by SWED to help him become a better spouse.
Before taking part in the classes, life as a couple was not easy. I used to think that women and men don't have much in common when it comes to problems with family life. After the classes, we understood that we can complement and help each other.
Burkina Faso is a male-dominated society, but the schools use a variety of teaching techniques, including role plays, to help the men understand the needs of their wives and how to meet them. For example, helping with housework. They also teach the men about women's rights, family planning, health and hygiene, and they are encouraged to include women in making family decisions too. The coordinator of the project in this area of Burkina Faso says the classes have made a big difference to women in the community.
There are even men who have attended the childbirth of their wives, which is part of assuming responsibility for the care of the children by the men. For the men in the village who weren't able to participate in the husband schools, those who did have become role models.
Although these are the first schools of their kind in Burkina Faso, similar projects have already been implemented in countries like South Africa and Niger. The United Nations says they can help reduce incidents of domestic violence, and they are also about
the acknowledgement that gender equality is not just about women and girls. Gender equality is about everybody,
including men and boys. Asked if husband schools could be beneficial in countries outside Africa, where statistically gender equality is better than Burkina Faso, Wageni replied,
so this is a good idea that can be replicated and even scaled up in other parts of the world, including those countries that feel that they have made a lot of gains.
Zupoka, meanwhile, says the classes have made her husband much more helpful and considerate.
The love between my husband and me is growing. Now, when my husband goes to the market, he brings me back little gifts, something he didn't do before. So I am very, very satisfied.
The national coordinator of the Husband Schools project says it's been a resounding success and is going to be expanded to other parts of the country. The second phase of the project is due to start later this year. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Yako, Burkina Faso.
Congolese refugee Sophie Lilombi Mwika has been living in Ivory Coast since 2003. Over the years, she has built a successful business in Ivory Coast's commercial capital, Abidjan, selling salted fish in local markets and in neighboring Mali. Things went so well, she sent money back to her parents and children and was expanding her storage facilities. She says it was through the fish business that she escaped poverty. But then the COVID-19 pandemic hit businesses hard, borders were closed, and sales dropped by 2/3, forcing her to halt expansion plans. The UN Refugee Agency stepped in and provided over 80 refugee entrepreneurs with financial assistance and training. Leonida Sankurunziza, the deputy representative of UNHCR in Ivory Coast, says the majority of people the agency supports are more impacted than others because they work in the informal sector. Amid the concerning rise in COVID cases, a number of universities in the western U.S. state of California have canceled their in-person classes and have returned to online learning. Christina Shevchenko spoke to several international students about the difficulties of learning during the pandemic Anna Rice narrates her story.
Most California university students were happy to get back to in-person learning in the fall. But the COVID Omicron surge has forced many California universities to resume online remote learning. Derek is from China. He lives here at one of the buildings of the University of California, Los Angeles Cooperative Housing. It's Derek's second year at UCLA studying anthropology, but so far he's been in the classroom for only one semester.
I do very much enjoy being on campus with everybody. I enjoy the company, I enjoy the social life, the social aspects. I like the feeling of being in classrooms, of walking from class to class. I feel more motivated to study when I'm on campus. I feel I'm getting a lot of things that I would not be getting if everything is online.
But now Derek, like thousands of his fellow students, will be returning to his room to sit in front of the computer screen.
In fact, if winter and spring are both going to be online, then by the time I graduate, I've only spent 1 quarter on campus. So I really think that it's quite sad.
21-year-old John lives at the fraternity house. He says when he and his fellow fraternity members learned about going back online, they all felt extremely stressed.
Nobody learns anything. You don't learn anything. Half of the time you can turn on your Zoom and you'll just walk around and do whatever.
So far, 7 California universities, Stanford and the University of Southern California among them, have announced they are switching to online classes. On top of that, universities will require proof of COVID booster shots from all students returning to the classroom. But booster shot requirements concern some students a lot less than the price of their tuition. As an international student, Derek pays roughly $40,000 a year for his education, but he believes studying online should not cost him that much.
But certainly as a student, I don't think it's entirely fair that we are paying for as much as we are.
Voice of America has sent inquiries to UCLA and University of Southern California, asking whether they have considered lowering tuition costs for students studying online, but has received no response. For now, the universities are only planning to hold online classes for a couple of weeks. That's welcome news for many here.
Even if you're there and being very attentive, it's still not the same as being in class.
Many students here just want to get back to the classroom. Christina Shevchenko, Anna Rice in Los Angeles, California, VOA News.
And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.